Chapter 1. The Signal from the Void. The escape pod's hull, battered and scorched, lay half-buried in the sands of a desolate planet. Its sleek alien design, once a testament to technological prowess, now looked like a dying creature gasping its last breath. Inside, Thea Lisser, a Zelvani diplomat, struggled to keep herself conscious. The pod's life support systems were failing, her oxygen levels dipping dangerously low. Every shallow breath felt like dragging sandpaper across her lungs. Her once immaculate diplomatic robes were torn and soiled, her violet skin dulled with grime. Thea was used to negotiating treaties and navigating galactic politics, not surviving on a lifeless rock in the middle of nowhere. Yet here she was, a survivor of a catastrophe that had reduced her starship, the Virian Grace, to nothing but debris scattered across the galaxy. The pod's interface flickered weakly, its AI struggling to maintain power. Distress signal. Active, the robotic voice repeated monotonously, as if trying to reassure her that help might come. Thea leaned back against the cracked seat, her energy depleted. She closed her luminous silver eyes, her thoughts drifting to the events that had brought her here. The fall of the Virian Grace. Thea had been aboard the Virian Grace, a diplomatic vessel carrying ambassadors, negotiators, and scholars from across the Zelvani Empire. Their mission was one of peace, meeting with the Human Federation to establish a joint trade agreement. The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, but their rapid advancements and unorthodox methods had garnered both awe and suspicion among the older species. The voyage had been uneventful until they entered the Thalaxis Nebula, a region known for its unstable gravitational waves. A sudden, violent surge had torn through their ship, disabling its engines and causing catastrophic damage. The Virian Grace had been thrown off course, its hull breached, and its systems failing. Chaos erupted as crew members scrambled to escape. Thea had barely made it to an escape pod as the ship began to break apart. Through the pod's viewport, she had watched helplessly as the Virian Grace was swallowed by the nebula, its once brilliant lights extinguished forever. Stranded. The pod had crash-landed on Kairos 3, a planet listed in no known database. Its surface was a wasteland of jagged rocks, shifting sands, and skies perpetually shrouded in ash-gray clouds. The pod's systems confirmed what her instincts already knew: there was no life here, no water, no vegetation, just endless desolation. For days or perhaps weeks, Thea had relied on the pod's dwindling resources to survive. The emergency rations were unpalatable but sustaining, the water recyclers barely functional. Thea had used every trick she knew to stretch the pod's systems, but it was a losing battle. The oxygen levels dropped steadily, and the distress beacon, her only hope, emitted a feeble signal that seemed destined to disappear into the void. She was losing hope. A faint spark. Thea stared at the blinking beacon on the console, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the frequency once again. Her voice was hoarse from days of sending out distress calls, but she tried one last time. "This is Thea Lisser, ambassador of the Zelvani Empire, broadcasting on all frequencies. My escape pod has crash-landed on an uncharted planet. I am in critical condition and require immediate assistance." She released the transmitter, her voice cracking with exhaustion. The silence that followed was unbearable. Thea closed her eyes, her head resting against the cold, dented wall of the pod. The loneliness of the planet seemed to press in on her, a suffocating weight that even the stars couldn't alleviate. Suddenly, a faint crackle cut through the silence. Her eyes flew open, her heart pounding. Distress. Signal. Received. The words were fragmented, distorted by static, but unmistakably real. Thea leaned forward, her hands shaking as she adjusted the console. "This is Thea Lisser. Please respond. I'm stranded on Kairos 3. Are you receiving this?" Another pause, then a clearer reply. "This is Ethan Cole, independent salvager. I've picked up your signal. Hold tight, I'm coming for you." Ethan Cole. Far from Kairos 3, aboard the freighter Red Horizon, Ethan Cole leaned back in his chair, staring at the blinking coordinates on his console. The distress signal had been faint, almost buried beneath the usual background noise of space, but he'd caught it. Years of scavenging and salvaging had honed his instincts, and something about this signal felt different. Ethan wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a particularly kind man. He was a practical one, eking out a living by finding derelict ships and forgotten wrecks in the far corners of the galaxy. But this signal wasn't just another automated distress beacon. There was a voice behind it, a desperate one. Kairos 3, he muttered, inputting the coordinates into the NAV system. The Red Horizon's AI, Sarah, chimed in. Kairos 3 is an uncharted planet in a dangerous sector. Limited data suggests severe environmental hazards. Ethan snorted. You're saying it's a bad idea. I'm saying you've had better ones, Sarah replied dryly. Ethan ran a hand through his unruly brown hair, his gray eyes narrowing. He didn't know who or what he'd find on Kairos 3, but something compelled him to go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the faint hope of a reward. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the memory of a time when he'd been the one waiting for a rescue that never came. Plot the course, Sarah, he said. Let's see who's out there. The approach. Hours later, the Red Horizon entered Kairos 3's atmosphere, its hull rattling as it pushed through the planet's turbulent winds. Ethan gripped the controls, his jaw clenched. The planet's surface came into view, an endless expanse of sand and rock, with no signs of life or civilization. Sarah's voice broke through the din, distress signal triangulated. It's coming from a location approximately 5 kilometers northeast. Ethan adjusted the ship's trajectory, scanning the ground below. Through the haze of dust, he spotted it, a small, damaged escape pod, half buried in the sand. There you are, he murmured. He brought the Red Horizon down carefully, landing a short distance from the pod. As the engines powered down, Ethan grabbed his Gear A plasma rifle, just in case, and a portable medkit. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he intended to be ready for anything. The first encounter. Thea heard the rumble of the ship before she saw it. Her heart raced as she peered through the viewport, her vision blurry from exhaustion. A freighter had landed nearby, its sleek design distinctly human. She pressed a hand to the pod's console, her voice trembling. This is Thea Lisser. Do you hear me? The response came almost immediately, loud and clear. Stay put, I am coming to you. Moments later, the pod's outer hatch creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. He was human, his features rugged and weathered, his eyes sharp as they scanned the cramped interior. Thea tried to stand, but her legs gave out beneath her. Easy, the man said, catching her before she fell. His voice was steady, reassuring. I've got you. Thea looked up at him, her vision swimming. You're Ethan? He nodded. That's me. Let's get you out of here. As he lifted her into his arms, Thea felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. She didn't know who this man was or why he had come, but he had answered her call, and that was enough. Chapter 2. Strangers in a Dead World. Ethan carried Thea Lisser through the swirling winds of Kairos 3's surface, her weight light in his arms despite her alien physiology. The landscape around them was barren and unforgiving, with jagged rocks jutting from the ground like skeletal remains. Dust storms howled across the horizon, creating an eerie, ever-present noise. The Red Horizon, Ethan's freighter, loomed nearby, its hull weathered but reliable. The ramp lowered with a mechanical hiss, and Ethan stepped inside, the harsh winds cutting off as the ship's systems sealed the airlock. Welcome aboard, Ethan muttered, setting Thea gently onto a padded bench in the medbay. He crouched beside her, pulling off his gloves. Let's see how bad it is. Thea's silver eyes fluttered open, her gaze locking onto his. Thank you for coming. Ethan gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. Lucky for you. I've got a habit of listening to faint signals. Let's get you patched up first, then you can tell me how you ended up in that tin can. First aid and first impressions. Ethan worked quickly, using the medkit to clean and seal the small cuts and abrasions on Thea's skin. Her violet complexion shimmered faintly under the ship's fluorescent lights, an otherworldly beauty that Ethan tried not to focus on. Instead, he asked questions to keep her conscious and alert. Name's Ethan, he said, dabbing antiseptic on a scrape along her arm. Independent salvager. What about you? Thea Lisser, she replied, her voice soft but steady. Ambassador of the Zelvani Empire. Ethan raised an eyebrow. An ambassador? Seems a little far from your usual diplomatic circuits. Thea winced as he applied a bandage, but she managed a faint smile. You could say that. Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. I'm guessing that crash wasn't part of the plan. What happened? Thea hesitated, her gaze dropping. My ship, the Virian Grace, was on a diplomatic mission. We were ambushed in the Thalaxis Nebula. I don't know who attacked us, but the ship was destroyed. I barely escaped in the pod. Ethan frowned. Ambushed? Any idea who'd want to target a diplomatic vessel? Thea shook her head. Not yet, but whoever it was, they were prepared. Ethan leaned against the medbay counter, his mind racing. Ambushing a diplomatic ship was no small feat. It wasn't just an attack, it was a statement. But before he could press further, the ship's AI, Sarah, interrupted. Ethan, sensors are detecting multiple energy signatures approaching from the southeast. Ethan stiffened. Define multiple. 4, possibly 5, Sarah replied. Their patterns match automated drones. Thea's expression darkened. They're tracking me. Unwelcome guests. Ethan rushed to the cockpit, Thea close behind despite her weakened state. The ship's display showed red blips closing in on their position, moving in coordinated patterns. Ethan recognized the design instantly. Hunter drones. Sleek, fast, and armed with enough firepower to punch through most hulls. They're syndicate drones, Ethan muttered, his jaw tightening. Damn scavengers must have picked up your signal. Thea's voice was laced with urgency. The syndicate works for the highest bidder. If they're here, it means someone hired them to find me or something I was carrying. Ethan shot her a sharp look. What were you carrying? Thea hesitated, her hands clenching at her sides. I can't say. Not yet. Ethan groaned, throwing his hands up. Great. So not only are we outnumbered, but we're also sitting ducks because of some mystery cargo. Thea stepped closer, her silver eyes meeting his. I didn't ask for this, Ethan, but I'll do whatever it takes to help us survive. Ethan stared at her for a moment, then nodded. Fine. Let's deal with the drones first, then we'll figure out the rest. The battle begins. The drones appeared on the horizon, their dark frames cutting through the storm. Ethan powered up the Red Horizon's defensive systems, the ship's turrets swiveling into position. Sarah, activate the auto-targeting sequence, Ethan ordered, his hands flying over the controls. Let's see how tough these bastards are. The first drone fired a volley of plasma bolts, the shots streaking toward the ship. The Red Horizon's shields flared as they absorbed the impact, but Ethan knew they wouldn't hold forever. Returning fire, Sarah announced. The turrets unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, striking one of the drones and sending it spiraling into the ground. The remaining drones split into evasive patterns, their movements quick and unpredictable. Clever little things, Ethan muttered. Thea, can you handle the secondary turret? Thea hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Show me. Ethan guided her to the turret's controls, quickly explaining the basics. Just aim and fire. Try not to hit anything that isn't trying to kill us. Thea's fingers moved with surprising precision as she locked onto a second drone. Her first shot missed, but her second struck true, the drone exploding in a burst of flame. Not bad, Ethan said, a hint of admiration in his tone. Thea smirked. You'd be surprised what diplomats learn. A desperate move. Despite their efforts, the drones adapted, their coordinated attacks wearing down the ship's shields. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. Shields at 30%. Critical failure imminent. Ethan cursed under his breath. We can't keep this up. Sarah, scan for any nearby terrain we can use. A pause, then. There's a canyon approximately 2 kilometers west. Its structure could provide cover. Ethan gripped the controls. Then that's where we're going. Thea, hold on. The Red Horizon veered sharply, its engines roaring as it raced toward the canyon. The drones pursued relentlessly, their plasma bolts grazing the ship's hull. Thea clung to her seat, her heart pounding as the rocky terrain of the canyon came into view. Ethan guided the ship into the narrow passage, the walls closing in around them. The drones hesitated, their movements more cautious in the confined space. The Red Horizon's turrets fired relentlessly, taking out another drone. 2 left, Ethan said through gritted teeth. Let's finish this. Thea focused on her turret, tracking one of the drones as it maneuvered between the canyon walls. She fired, the shot connecting and sending the drone crashing into the rock face. Ethan took out the last drone with a well-placed missile, the explosion lighting up the canyon. Silence followed, the only sound the hum of the ship's engines. Drones neutralized, Sarah confirmed. Ethan exhaled, leaning back in his seat. That was too close. Thea turned to him, her expression serious. Thank you. I know this isn't your fight, but dash. Ethan held up a hand. Save it. Just tell me what we're up against. Thea nodded slowly. I will. But first, we need to talk about what's really at stake. The mystery deepens. Back in the safety of the ship, Thea finally revealed more about her mission. The Virian Grace hadn't just been carrying diplomats, had been transporting a sealed artifact, something ancient and powerful. The artifact was being delivered to the Human Federation, Thea explained. It's connected to the Obelisk Network, a series of structures rumored to control vast energy sources across the galaxy. Ethan frowned. And now the Syndicate's after it? Thea nodded. Whoever hired them wants the artifact for themselves. If they succeed, entire worlds could be at risk. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had planned to drop Thea off at the nearest safe port and move on, but this was bigger than either of them. Guess we're in this together now, he said finally. Thea's lips curved into a faint smile. It seems so. As the red horizon left the canyon and set course for the next destination, both Ethan and Thea knew the battle was far from over. The Syndicate wouldn't stop, and the artifact's secrets would only lead them deeper into danger. But for now, they had each other and that was enough. Chapter 3. The Artifact's Secrets. The red horizon cruised through the emptiness of space, its battered hull groaning as the ship's autopilot navigated away from Cairo's 3. Inside the cockpit, Ethan Grayson and Thea Lisser stood before a glowing containment field. Floating within was the artifact, an unassuming black obelisk, small enough to fit in one's hand, but radiating an aura that made the air around it hum with latent energy. It doesn't look like much, Ethan said, his arms crossed as he studied it. Thea's silver eyes were locked on the object, her expression tense. Its appearance is deceiving. This artifact is one of the keys to the Obelisk Network. It's said to unlock immense energy sources scattered across the galaxy. Energy that could either save worlds or destroy them. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And the Syndicate wants it for the latter, I assume. Thea nodded. Whoever hired them knows its potential. If they succeed in collecting the other keys and activating the network, the balance of power in the galaxy will shift violently. Ethan let out a low whistle. So we're sitting on a galactic nuke. Great. Before Thea could respond, the ship's AI, Sarah, interrupted. Incoming transmission. Ethan straightened, his gaze narrowing. From who? Encrypted signal, Sarah replied, attempting to decode. The transmission crackled to life on the cockpit's main console, displaying the holographic image of a human male. His face was sharp and angular, his eyes cold and calculating. Ethan Grayson, the man said, his voice calm but laced with menace. You have something that belongs to me. Ethan exchanged a glance with Thea. Who's asking? I am Commander Thalrin, leader of the Orsai Syndicate's Acquisition Division, the man replied. Return the artifact, and I may let you live. Ethan snorted. Appreciate the offer, but I think I'll pass. Thalrin's lips curved into a thin smile. Brave. Foolish, but brave. My forces will find you, no matter where you run. Enjoy your remaining moments of freedom. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the cockpit in tense silence. Friendly guy, Ethan muttered, turning to Thea. Any bright ideas? Thea's expression was grim. We need to figure out how to hide the artifact's energy signature. As long as it's active, they'll keep tracking us. Ethan nodded. Then we need answers and fast. A destination in mind. Thea tapped a few commands into the ship's navigation console, pulling up a star map. There's a place that might help. An ancient Zelvani archive on Solari Prime. It's been abandoned for centuries, but it should still contain records about the Obelisk Network. Ethan frowned. How far is it? 3 jumps away, Thea replied. It'll take us into contested space, but it's our best shot. Ethan sighed. Fine, set the course. But if we run into more Syndicate goons, I'm blaming you. The first jump. The red horizon entered hyperspace, the swirling blue currents of the slipstream surrounding the ship as it made its first jump. Ethan used the downtime to run diagnostics on the ship's systems while Thea studied the artifact. "You're awfully attached to that thing," Ethan remarked as he entered the room, wiping his hands on a rag. "Anything new?" Thea glanced up from her notes. "Its energy is reacting to me. It's subtle, but I can feel it. It's almost as if it's alive." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Alive? That's not unsettling at all." Thea smiled faintly. "HFY Legends say the Obelisk Network was created by a lost civilization, one that infused their consciousness into their technology. If that's true, the artifact might be more than just a key." Ethan sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Let's say we find the archive and figure out how to hide this thing. What's the plan after that?" Thea hesitated, then said, "We destroy it." Ethan frowned. "I thought you said that wasn't possible." "There's a way," Thea admitted, "but it requires a specific sequence of events, and it won't be easy." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Nothing ever is." The ambush. As the red horizon emerged from its second jump, alarms blared across the cockpit. Ethan sprinted to the controls, his heart sinking as he saw a fleet of Syndicate ships waiting for them. "Damn it," he muttered. They were waiting. Sarah's voice was calm but urgent. Multiple enemy ships detected, initiating evasive maneuvers. The Syndicate fleet opened fire, plasma bolts streaking toward the red horizon. Ethan banked hard, dodging the first volley, but the second struck the shields, making the ship shudder. "Shields at 60%, Sarah reported. Thea appeared beside him, her expression tense. "Can we outrun them?" Ethan shook his head. "Not in this sector. We need to fight." The ship's turrets roared to life, firing back at the Syndicate ships. 2 enemy fighters went down, but the remaining ships tightened their formation, their weapons tearing through the red horizon's defenses. "Shields at 30%, Sarah warned. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Sarah, divert all power to weapons and engines. We need to punch through their line." The ship surged forward, its plasma cannons firing in rapid succession. The Syndicate ships scattered, their formation breaking just long enough for the red horizon to slip through. "We're clear for now," Ethan said, his hands trembling as he gripped the controls. Thea placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you." Ethan glanced at her, his expression softening. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this mess." The archive. Hours later, the red horizon landed on Solari Prime, a desolate world bathed in perpetual twilight. The archive was a massive structure carved into a mountain, its entrance marked by towering pillars covered in glowing HFY symbols. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with the scent of decay. Thea led the way, her steps sure despite the eerie silence. They reached a central chamber where a massive console stood, its surface covered in dust. Thea activated the console, and a holographic interface sprang to life. She began sifting through the data, her fingers flying over the controls. "Found it," she said after a few tense minutes. "The instructions for masking the artifact's energy signature. It'll take time, but it's possible." Before Ethan could respond, the chamber shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling as the sound of distant explosions echoed through the archive. "They found us," Ethan said, his voice tight. Thea grabbed the artifact, her eyes blazing with determination. "Then we make our stand." The battle for Solari Prime. Syndicate forces poured into the archive, their weapons blazing. Ethan and Thea fought side by side, using the narrow corridors to their advantage. The artifact pulsed with energy in Thea's hands, its glow growing brighter with each passing moment. "We can't hold them off forever," Ethan shouted over the chaos. Thea's voice was steady despite the danger. "We don't need to. Just hold them long enough for me to activate the masking protocol." Ethan nodded, covering her as she worked. The artifact's energy surged, creating a barrier that repelled the Syndicate forces. Thea's hands trembled as she completed the sequence, and the artifact's glow dimmed, its energy signature vanishing. "It's done," she said, turning to Ethan. He grinned, firing one last shot before retreating to her side. "Let's get out of here." A fragile victory. Back aboard the Red Horizon, Thea secured the now-dormant artifact in a containment field. Ethan collapsed into the pilot's seat, his exhaustion evident. "Well," he said, glancing at her. "That was fun." Thea smiled faintly. We've bought ourselves time, but the syndicate won't stop. Ethan nodded. Then we keep moving. Wherever this leads, we'll face it together. As the ship lifted off, the stars stretched out before them, full of danger and possibility. Thea and Ethan knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time, they felt a glimmer of hope. Chapter 4. The Final Reckoning. The red horizon hurtled through the cold expanse of space, its engines humming with steady determination. In the ship's cockpit, Ethan Grayson and Thea Lisser sat in grim silence. The artifact rested in its containment field, its faint glow now hidden behind layers of shielding that masked its energy signature from the Syndicate's trackers. But both of them knew that the Syndicate's leader, Commander Thalrin, wouldn't give up so easily. "We've delayed them," Thea said, her voice calm but edged with weariness. "But they'll regroup. They always do." Ethan glanced at her, his gray eyes narrowing. "Then we take the fight to them." Thea frowned. "You're suggesting we confront the Syndicate head-on? That's suicide." Ethan leaned forward, tapping a few commands into the console. "Not if we hit them where it hurts. Thalrin's flagship, the Dominion Spear, is their command center. Take that out, and the rest of their operation crumbles." Thea hesitated, her silver eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Do you have a plan, or is this just bravado?" Ethan smirked. "A little of both." The plan. Thea followed Ethan to the Red Horizon's tactical station, where a holographic display of the Syndicate's fleet appeared. At its center was the Dominion Spear, a massive dreadnought bristling with weaponry. "The Dominion Spear is heavily fortified," Ethan said, pointing to its vulnerable aft section. "But it has a weak spot. Its power core is exposed during maintenance cycles. If we can slip past their defenses and plant an explosive charge, we can take out the entire ship." Thea studied the display, her mind racing. "And how do we get close without being obliterated?" Ethan grinned. "We use a decoy." He brought up a schematic of a small, automated cargo drone. "We rig one of these with a cloaking field and a stealth drive. It'll carry us close enough to board the Dominion Spear while the Syndicate thinks it's just debris." Thea raised an eyebrow. "And once we're inside?" Ethan's grin faded, replaced by a serious expression. "We improvise." The infiltration. The plan came together quickly. Using spare parts scavenged from the Red Horizon's cargo hold, Ethan and Thea constructed the decoy drone. It was crude but functional, its stealth systems just strong enough to fool the Syndicate sensors. Thea programmed the drone's navigation systems while Ethan prepared their gear: plasma rifles, explosives, and a portable hacking device. As they boarded the drone, Ethan glanced at Thea. "You ready for this?" She nodded, her silver eyes resolute. "We don't have a choice." The drone launched from the Red Horizon, its cloaking field shimmering as it disappeared into the void. The Dominion Spear loomed ahead, its massive silhouette cutting through the darkness like a blade. Syndicate patrol ships circled the dreadnought, their scanners sweeping the surrounding space. Inside the drone, Thea watched the proximity monitor, her heart pounding. "We're almost there." Ethan checked his rifle, his jaw tight. "Let's hope they don't look too closely." The drone slipped past the patrols, approaching a maintenance hatch on the Dominion Spear's aft section. The hatch opened automatically, the drone docking smoothly. Ethan and Thea exited the drone, their boots landing silently on the dreadnought's metallic floor. "We're in," Ethan whispered. "Let's move." The heart of the beast. The interior of the Dominion Spear was a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, filled with the hum of machinery and the distant voices of Syndicate soldiers. Ethan and Thea moved cautiously, their weapons at the ready. Thea's hacking device displayed a map of the ship, guiding them toward the power core. "This place is a fortress," Thea murmured. "Are you sure we can pull this off?" Ethan smirked. "What's life without a little risk?" They reached the power core's chamber without incident, but their luck ran out as the doors slid open. Inside, a squad of Syndicate soldiers stood guard, their weapons immediately snapping toward the intruders. "Down!" Ethan shouted, diving for cover. The chamber erupted into chaos as plasma bolts flew in every direction. Ethan returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. Thea ducked behind a console, using her hacking device to override the soldiers' comms and sow confusion. "We need to plant the charge," she shouted over the noise. Ethan nodded, firing one last shot before sprinting toward the power core. He attached the explosive charge to the core's base, his hands moving quickly as he activated the timer. "Charge is set," he called out. "Let's get out of here." The confrontation. As they turned to leave, a new figure entered the chamber. Commander Thalrin, clad in black armor and wielding a massive energy blade, stepped forward with an air of menace. "You've caused quite a mess," Thalrin said, his voice cold. "But it ends here." Ethan raised his rifle, but Thalrin was faster. The commander swung his blade, deflecting the shot and closing the distance in an instant. Ethan barely dodged the next strike, the blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. "Thea, go!" Ethan shouted, parrying Thalrin's next attack with the butt of his rifle. "Get to the drone." "I'm not leaving you," Thea shouted back, firing her weapon at Thalrin. The shot struck his armor, staggering him just long enough for Ethan to land a solid kick. "Go!" Ethan repeated, his voice fierce. Reluctantly, Thea ran toward the exit, her heart pounding. She reached the drone and activated its launch sequence, waiting anxiously for Ethan to appear. A narrow escape. Inside the chamber, Ethan and Thalrin continued their brutal fight. The commander was relentless, his blade cutting through metal and sending sparks flying. Ethan fought with everything he had, using his agility to stay one step ahead. Finally, Ethan saw his chance. He grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt and hurled it at Thalrin, the explosion throwing the commander back. Without wasting a moment, Ethan sprinted toward the exit. The charge detonated as Ethan reached the drone, the explosion ripping through the Dominion spear. Thea pulled him inside just as the drone launched, the shockwave propelling them into space. Victory and resolve. Back aboard the Red Horizon, Ethan and Thea watched the Dominion spear burn. The Dreadnought's destruction sent shockwaves through the Syndicate's fleet, scattering their forces. "We did it," Thea said, her voice filled with relief. Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaustion written across his face. "Yeah, but they'll regroup. Thalrin's not dead, not yet." Thea placed a hand on his shoulder, her silver eyes meeting his. "Then we'll face him together. The galaxy deserves better than to be ruled by fear." Ethan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Guess you're stuck with me, Ambassador." As the Red Horizon disappeared into the stars, both Ethan and Thea knew their fight was far from over. But together, they had proven that even the smallest acts of defiance could ignite a flame of hope.